The Leica M262 was released back in 2015, but it's actually a stripped down version of the Leica M240, which was actually released in 2012. And while the already 3-year-old technology in the 262 would deter most buyers from buying one, in the world of Leica, less is more. And so when they removed video and live view and a few other features in the camera to make it an affordable version, a lot of Leica users were probably very happy about that. And over the past few years, as this camera has aged, it has dipped into that affordable used Leica category where normal people can sell half of their belongings and just about afford one of these. Minus the Leica lens. No, I don't do a blooper reel. I've had the Leica M262 for about 6 months now, and I've shot a ton of really bad photos with it, but I've been fortunate enough to actually get quite a lot of photos that I really like with it as well. And so I think at this point I've had enough time and experience with it that I can write a bit of a short-term review about it. As always, I'll put up a bunch of the pictures that I've taken with the camera on the screen. I'll maybe put a few video clips in as well. And also, this is less about the pixel peeping and like specs and comparison with other cameras and just kind of my experience and opinion with it. So take it with a pinch of salt and always do more research before spending this much money on a used camera if you're thinking about one of these. And if we were just talking about specs, we would run out of things to say pretty quickly. The M262 has a half decent 24 megapixel CMOS sensor. It has an expanded ISO range of 100 to 6400, which is not impressive at all these days. It does have that classic M design with relatively few buttons on the outside of it. It has a burst rate of only 2 frames per second, which is practically not a burst rate at all. You might as well just keep pressing the button. You get about 7 shots before you hit the buffer when you're shooting in RAW. Of course, there's no autofocus, and that's probably about it for the main specs of the camera. And it's an impressively small list, and that is why it's ignored by the many, and I think the reason why it's loved by the few.
Why do you have it? It's so expensive.
I'm the few. I really wanted to know what the fuss was about, but like a lot of the photographers that I idolized used these, and a lot of them still do. I've also shot a lot of photos that I really like with it, so it can't be that, like it kind of works this is what I was kind of wanting to say in the review actually at one point. It's kind of like, it does a lot of the things that I wanted a camera to do, but it really doesn't do fuck all else, which makes it not versatile at all. So yeah, they don't seem to lose much value either. The M262 is riddled with limitations, particularly the manual focus, which can be quite tricky to get a hang of at first. But if you give it some time and read a little bit, try and understand why it's like this, it can be surprisingly fast and easy once you get the hang of it. Especially if, like me, you shoot at f11 and f8, because just knowing roughly where your finger is on that focus scale, you'll know how much depth of field you're getting, and you can expect to get most stuff in focus without really thinking too much about it. And with that in mind, kind of makes it faster than any autofocus that I've ever used. The drawback there is that in low light, I find it can be difficult to find a point of contrast that you can use the rangefinder patch to decide your focus point. So yeah, in the dark it gets a little more difficult, and the learning curve is just a bit steeper, I guess. The ISO begins to struggle at around 3200. It's 6400 for most people. They're going to say it's unusable. It does get a bit grainy, and in a lot of pictures it just has that digital noise where there's like lines and stripes on the screen, and it doesn't really work. Sometimes you can kind of get away with it and it doesn't look horrendous, and other times, yeah, it's not great. So I try and stick to no more than 3200. And adding to that learning curve, that just means that you're kind of stuck to using slower shutter speeds and wider apertures once the light gets a little bit lower. Of course, flash is an option as well. The M262 has some modern auto features like auto shutter and auto ISO. However, I don't find it to be particularly useful. It doesn't take my mind off it anymore because the only metering mode in the camera seems to be center weighted average. And so if I'm waiting on something to pass through a scene and the point I'm metering on is kind of dark, when I do take that picture, anything that's lighter in the scene will end up overexposed, and I've sort of fell for that before. So I just find it easier to take a couple test exposures, get my settings right for the space that I'm in, and just kind of go with that. Unless it's an overcast day, in which case the light is pretty much even wherever I am, and that makes it a little bit easier, but it still has sometimes gone wrong, so generally I've just stuck to the manual exposure. On top of the low ISO range is pretty low dynamic range, and that's not uncommon for an older camera, and it's pretty well known that Leicas don't have the highest dynamic range. But if you overexpose maybe by a stop or more, you're going to start to lose detail in the highlights. It does a lot better if you underexpose a little bit and you bring it up. You can save details in the shadows a bit more. And you know, I've had a few shots that I've underexposed quite a lot by accident and brought it back by a good 2 stops, and it's looked pretty good. The screen on the back is not useful for much, just, you know, it's for your menu and for checking your exposures really, because you don't have video or live view. It's not really on a lot of the time. The screen is fine, but it doesn't really compete with similar age cameras, in my opinion. I find that if I'm looking at it at the wrong angle, it'll tint a certain color and kind of make things look off a little bit. So you have to be looking at it straight on, otherwise it kind of throws you off a little bit. So it's kind of a drawback, but the screen, it's not terrible, and you know, you check your exposure with it and that's it really. And furthermore, the menu is literally only 2 pages, and a lot of that is just your firmware version, format your card, you know, basic settings, copyright information, stuff like that. So there's not a lot of reason to be going into the menu once you kind of have the camera set the way you want it. And that could really be a plus or a minus depending on the type of person that you are really. Easily my least favorite thing about the Leica M262 is how laggy the start time is. From when you switch it on to when it'll actually take a picture, can be, it's more than a second, maybe around 2 seconds. Let's try it. So I'll put it near the microphone so you can hear the on click, and then I'll press the button until it takes a picture. So I think that was like 2.5 seconds. Let's try it one more time. On 1,000th of a second on. That's probably, I think that's like 2.5 seconds, which is not enough when you're trying to quickly switch on the camera and pick it up to get like a last second photo that you didn't see coming at first. So to get around that, I leave the camera switched on, and every so often I just kind of half press the shutter button to wake it up. I think you can switch it to never going to sleep, but sometimes I don't mind it, and I just get into the habit of doing this once in a while. Now the positives of the Leica M262 are maybe a little bit less tangible. Well, the first one is pretty tangible actually. I love the size of the battery because the battery life is fantastic, and it's a big battery with very little processing power or electronic stuff to deal with, so it's the only battery I have, and it's never ran out in a full day's shooting. I have not counted how many shots it can take, but it's never drained out on me. I always come home with like 30-something% left. The other thing is that the raw files, when unedited, look better to me than any other raw files that I've had. If I did nothing to them at all, then I'd be pretty happy. Sometimes I'll add a touch of contrast, maybe I'll brighten things up if I've underexposed, but I'm really not playing with colors or, you know, individual stuff that much. Like, it's just boost the contrast a bit, and you know, maybe profile corrections, because the lens I have vignettes a little bit. The other thing that I really like is the ergonomics, and I know there's not a lot of buttons to figure out where to put to make it more ergonomic, but the camera functions very well, and once you get used to where your hands need to be, you don't need you can almost operate it without looking. I don't know if the form follows function on this, if it's been designed in that way, or if it's really like the form's been around for so long that they need to try and make it function like the old cameras so that they don't have to change the form. But it fits nice in your hand, and if you're holding it with two hands as you're supposed to, it's extremely comfortable. I do think that this grip on the back, this thumb grip, is not the best. It could be maybe a little bit bigger or more grippy or something. For a full frame camera and for its age, it is a very compact design. It's not that much bigger than a Fujifilm X Pro. It's maybe a little fatter and, you know, more sort of square and bulky overall. But with a tiny little lens like this on it, you can throw it over your shoulder or just sort of, you know, I usually wrap this around my wrist, and you can carry it around all day and your arm won't get tired, your hand won't get tired. You just can't really carry it the same way as you might carry a DSLR, whereas, you know, my old Canon 5D, I can sort of hold it and dangle it off my fingers with barely even holding on to it with my thumb. I have to hold this more like this, sort of like tuck it under my arm. And I would far rather carry this around all day than a Canon 5D. And one of my favorite things is, it's kind of dumb, but the shutter sound it's just this deep clunk sound. Listen. And to be honest, it's louder than I expected, but it is quieter than many other Leica models. And once you're out in the street and there's a little bit of background noise, it's very, very subtle. You don't really hear it unless it's right beside your head when you're taking the picture. Oh, and actually one last thing that I really like about this that I don't think I've had on any other camera is I have the image review off, so you won't see it come up on the screen when you take a picture. But if you hold your finger down, let me take a picture of something brighter. If you hold your finger down, it will stay on the screen until you remove your finger from the shutter. And that's just, I find that a great way to check your exposure quickly, and then you can make any adjustments before you keep shooting. You don't have to like go into the play menu or anything like that. But technical specs are not even the point of a Leica M camera. They purposely have never tried to put things into these cameras that keep up with the rest of the industry. They've sort of stayed true to this old school sort of classic simplified design. It's really an all feeling, no facts kind of camera. It has this super simple design, simple layout, very basic spec list, and it's kind of an involved process to shoot with, at least at first, until you learn how it makes you shoot a little bit differently. You have to sort of mold yourself into this slightly different way of working to sort of work with its limitations. But once you do, it can feel a little bit freeing, and the shooting experience is kind of more organic and maybe a little bit special. But it's also aware how pretentious this sounds as I'm saying it. It's kind of ridiculous. I think I would liken it to like buying a classic car. If you bought a Porsche from the 70s, you'd probably find that a 2019 Honda Civic, or let's go one further, 2019 Tesla Model S would be the faster, more practical car that's easier to drive and does the job much better than a classic Porsche. But that like classic design, that nostalgic feel, the more involved experience of driving it, the manual gear shifting, all that gives it a special feeling that, while maybe less practical to get where you're going, gives you a better overall feeling of that experience at the end. And that's the best I can do to explain what the difference of shooting with a Leica M camera is. it doesn't make you any better. Sometimes it makes you worse. But when you get it right and when you learn how to work with it, it feels fantastic. I almost forgot, I meant to talk about the viewfinder. The viewfinder is, it's probably not the biggest and brightest one I've ever seen. I mean, it's pretty bright. However, it seems to do just fine and the frame lines are plenty bright. It also just perfectly fits for a 35mm lens. If you put the 28 on, you can see the frame lines, but I find you can't really see them all at once. And you know, you have to kind of like move your eye from side to side a little bit. So I wouldn't, you know, you might need those modifier things to use a 28 or wider. But if you're a 35mm person, then you're going to have no complaints because it fills the viewfinder up perfectly. So I don't think that there's any one person that the Leica M262 or any Leica M is perfect for. I want to say that it's sort of, you know, well designed for street and documentary type photography, but I'm well aware of people across all sorts of genres that absolutely love to use these. And also, I'm well aware that much of the time it's little more than a fashion accessory or a status symbol for people who want to spend a hell of a lot of money on the fanciest, most exclusive cameras out there. Some people feel that they provide a film shooting experience from the tactile controls and the minimal spec list. But personally, I don't subscribe to any of that just because it has the same design as the film M bodies. It feels nothing like any of the film cameras I've ever shot with. None of which were M cameras, but the film experience to me is a vastly different thing from just the tactile controls that are similar to another film camera but put onto a digital camera. I know a lot of people disagree with me about that, especially some of my friends. If that works for people and that's how they feel about it, then great. Some people also say it slows them down, makes them more considerate. I find I can shoot just as fast with this, if not faster. So for that reason, I think it's kind of different things to different people. If it helps you slow down and you like that, then great. And if it helps you shoot quicker and you like that, then great. So maybe it just comes down to, you know, to you and how you like to do things or what you want to get from the camera, from a camera. So in conclusion, I really love my M262. However, I would not recommend anybody buy one of these. I would recommend almost any other modern digital camera over this. And that's largely down to the very high price of entry. Even with used versions of these cameras, it really has, it kind of has a lack of versatility and a very steep and specific learning curve that I don't think will work for most people, and in many situations doesn't even work for me. But regardless of that, on a sunny day in good weather, if I was going out to shoot street photography or an event or something like that, I would still find myself reaching for this camera. And if the Leica M or an M262 is for you, you don't need me to tell you that. You're just kind of going to get a feel for it. As I said, it's an all feelings and no facts kind of camera. All right, thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.